Hey, this is Learn Algebra Faster, and in this video we are going to discuss the science bar graph. So bar graphs are used in math class, and they're used to show quantities of things. So it's an easy way to see different quantities of things. But what's cool about them is that you don't just have to use them in math class. You can actually use science-related items and put them on a bar graph and use them for that purpose too. Because truly, the only thing that bar graphs need are something that can be measured. So, even though math class is really heavy about numbers and counting and algebra and all these other sorts of things, you can actually use science-related terms and still make bar graphs and still have things that are useful. So just to prove it, let's do a few examples. So the first example, things that are very common to be measured in science are mass, length, and volume. And so we'll choose two of them as examples for making a science-related bar graph. So let's start with mass. Okay, so let's think of something that we can measure mass with. So let's take the mass of a chunk of calcium carbonate. So there you go. That's a solid material. This is something that you definitely would see in science class. You would not see it in math class. So if we had a big chunk of calcium carbonate, and let's say that we are choosing a few students to make a measurement. So let's choose student A, B, C, and D. So 4 different students are going to measure the mass of this chunk of calcium carbonate. And let's say that maybe we have 100 grams, 100.5 grams, and maybe 101 grams, and 101.5. Okay, so that's the scale. Our vertical axis starts out, around 100 and goes up to 101.5 grams. And we have 3 different people using that they're measuring the mass of the chunk of this. So maybe student A measures it at 100.5. So we log that and fill it in. Maybe student B measures it at 101. Maybe student C gets somewhere in between. So maybe, 100.7 grams. And let's say D ends up with 100.7 grams as well. So you can see here that we're not just counting things, we're not doing any computation, but we still can use this in science class. We can make a science bar graph just by measuring something. So we had 4 students measure the same thing. Now, the difference in half a gram is very small. I mean, it's barely noticeable. If you had this in your hand, you likely would not even notice the difference. So even though there was a slight variation, we know about what the real mass of this rock is. So as long as it can be measured, you can record the data and you can throw it up on a bar graph. So that's one example. Let's do another. Okay, let's actually do something similar, and let's measure volume. Okay, so maybe we are measuring the volume of 2 beakers and we're going to say it's as measured by 3 students. So that's going to be the title of this bar graph. Okay, so let's we're just making this up here, but let's pretend that we had 2 beakers. They were full of a substance or full of a solution that we used in a science experiment, and we have 2 different beakers, and we are going to let 3 students each measure the 2 beakers. So let's say that the first beaker is beaker A, and the second beaker is beaker B. Okay, and we're going to have 3 different students measure it. So let's get started. So let's try to define. So we've already labeled our horizontal axis. We've already labeled that as the 2 objects that we're going to measure. So that's the beakers. Now we need to measure our vertical axis, which in this case we're going to make it up. I'm not actually doing this experiment. So let's say that we have, let's do 50 milliliters, 100 milliliters, 150 milliliters, and 200 milliliters. Okay, and now we said that we were going to measure this by 3 students, so it's pretty crucial that we have a key here, and we'll say that the first student, so this is the key. Let's say the first student is Gary, and we'll fill out the other students. So Gary measures the first beaker, and he comes up with it being, let's see, how about 160 milliliters. And so Gary, as we defined over here, Gary's green. So we're going to fill in Gary's bar as green. And let's say he measured the second beaker at maybe 65. So I'll try to get that as close to 65 as I can. And we will fill it in. All right, and let's say that our second student is red, and this is Lisa. And Lisa measures beaker A to be about 170. And let's say she measures beaker B to be right at 60. So we'll fill her in. Okay, and our third student, let's say this is Julie. And Julie measures beaker A at maybe, let's do 160. And she measures beaker B at 70. So there you go. So just because we're doing bar graphs doesn't mean we have to only do math-related stuff. So we could take science measurements just like we would do in a science class, and as long as we record the data, we can show it on a bar graph. So this looks really clean. If you had to make a guess of what the actual measurement in beaker A was, you could very easily take the average of these 3 measurements, and that would be really close to probably what beaker A is actually holding. Similarly, if you measured if you took the 3 different measurements with beaker B and you did an average of those, that's a really good estimation of what the final volume was in beaker B. So we had several different people measure it, and when you have multiple people measuring things, you could tend to get just a little bit of error, but we can tell that these 3 people are really close to each other. Now, one thing that's cool here is that since they're measuring the same thing, it would look really odd if one number was a lot higher than all the rest. So in this case, if we had these 3 students, we know that on beaker A they pretty much agreed with everything. In beaker B we have 2 people who have a measurement that's really close to each other, and then all of a sudden we have this outlier up here. We could maybe ask Julie to remeasure or do something like that. So it would be easy to kind of spot spot an error or spot some trouble. So again, I just want to encourage you that even though bar graphs are mainly used in math class, it's really easy to use them in science class. All you have to do is focus on the measurements, because bar graphs are all about putting the data where it's easy to see. If you're struggling with bar graphs, you can go to our website at learnalgebrafaster.com. We have lots of tutorials on bar graphs in particular, and we have lots of other content around different math areas. So thank you for watching this video, and feel free to check out more videos at learnalgebrafaster.com.